Hello, this is Sandra Fitzgerald, your host for our ministry, Generational Ministries, and this is entitled The Tapestry of Life, and it's also the sequel to Pieces of a Patchwork Quilt. I hope you enjoy this as we get into our short story. A tapestry is a beautiful yet mysterious form of artwork. It is fascinating to watch the craftsman or woman take bits and pieces of colored thread and weave them together in a rich and intricate design. What begins as something that makes no sense to the casual observer all comes together in the end, shedding light on what started out as bits and pieces of colored thread. This thread, which began as a thought in the artist's mind, now takes on life as the purpose of its creation is revealed. It might be a tapestry intended to hang on the walls of someone's humble home, or it might be a picture of beautiful fall flowers with fascinating blends of oranges and reds. Or it could very well be a piece of artwork intended for a museum with designs of ancient castles and knights and horses. Or a tapestry may simply be a short prayer which graces the wall of a favorite sunroom. Whatever it ends up being, it has begun as pieces and bits of colored thread that made no sense. Isn't that how life is sometimes? When we take time to reflect upon our lives, we have to admit some of the things that happened to us simply made no sense. Yet somehow God took those bits and pieces of thread and wove them together and made it all work. In fact, Paul puts it best in a letter to the Romans. Listen to him in chapter 8 and 28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. In this lesson story, we will be looking at the lives of different biblical characters. In fact, we are going to weave a tapestry to better illustrate how their lives started out as bits and pieces of colored thread that made no sense. Yet, God wove all those pieces together and created for them a beautiful tapestry of life that worked together for their good and the good of others. For the first frame, we will examine a weaving with many different colors. There are rich reds and cobalt blues and striking yellows and oranges. All of these colors are woven together and takes on the form of what looks like an ancient Hebrew coat. The weaver continues on to nimbly create golden sheaves of wheat in his intricate design. He changes the thread to create 11 silvery stars and a bright reddish orange sun. As he works, his design begins to take on ominous tones, dark threads that are used to depict what looks like a pit. And there's a figure of a little boy woven in. As we gaze at the tapestry, we can almost hear the cries of the child in the scene come to life. Brown camels are woven into it, and we can see the artist's intentions are to make the thread resemble the Egyptian desert sands with its browns and golds in beautiful undertones. The child is taken on a journey far from his home and family. We don't understand all of what the artist is creating, yet the effects are so captivating we can't look away. He adds other colors now. These threads have formed a picture of an Egyptian woman with a vengeful expression on her face. By now, in the tapestry, the boy has grown into a handsome young man, and he is depicted with favor. Yet the threads of the tapestry change once again into dark, murky colors. These colors indicate a prison or a dungeon. Again, we can almost hear the cries of despair as the young man in the tapestry finds himself captive. The weaver continues with his masterpiece. He uses brown and white bits of yarn to make 14 cows. He used greens and yellows to make 14 stalks of corn. We are sure he has made a mistake and almost laugh out loud because 7 of the cows were so skinny and poorly pictured, and 7 stalks of corn he had weighed were so thin he barely used any thread to create them at all. Yet, because he is a master weaver, we have faith that in the end the result will come together with a glorious work of art. The child is depicted as a man as the scene unfolds. No longer is he dressed in rags. Gold thread is now used to weave jewelry for his finger and neck. Now his clothes are fine linen, and the artist weaves magnificent charcoals and black for a horse-drawn chariot. The artist depicts the once abandoned child and convicted felon as a man of power and wealth. Gone are the drab colors of the dungeon. Now the tapestry sings with the rich opulence of one of the richest countries on earth, ancient Egypt. Further on in the tapestry, we see the return of the 11 silvery stars, and they are all bowing down to the reddish orange sun. The tapestry that began as bits and pieces of thread that made no sense has finally come together for us as the weavers, and no doubt for the one depicted. In the story of Joseph and his 11 brothers, we can clearly see the artist's intentions were to show how Joseph was abused by his brothers out of jealousy and sold into slavery in a foreign land, only to be wrongly and unjustly imprisoned by the lies of his master's wife. Time passed, and Joseph was remembered for a special gift he had of interpreting dreams, which he did for the Pharaoh, which landed him as the second position in Egypt, which was the land of plenty during a famine, which brought the 11 brothers to Egypt to buy grain, which saved their family from starvation, which was the whole purpose of Joseph ending up in Egypt in the first place. Through the use of color and ingenuity, the artist creates meaning out of what started off as bits and pieces of thread that made no sense. God used this situation that took Joseph through some horrible changes and worked a beautiful tapestry of life to the good of an entire nation. As the artist finishes his frame, we can't help but admire his sense of mystery and timing in this ancient yet beautiful account of the man we know as Joseph. The tapestry hangs still in the book of Genesis. Check it out for yourself. The halls of Genesis are also grafted with another masterpiece. This one also began life as bits and pieces of colored thread that made no sense. Yet the artist brings it all together in the end with purpose and meaning. He starts off with green thread for the reeds and bulrushes. He puts them beside green, gray, and blue water, creating a long river. Then artfully weaves a small brown basket with black pitch and in the basket the image of a child. The black thread is used once again to create the glorious hair of an Egyptian princess. Startling white threads are used to make the fine linen of her clothes. The colors change to gold and silver and yellows and bronze as the child grows up in a palace surrounded by the wealth status of solid gold, and solid gold lines the corridors of his adopted home. The child is a man now, and the artist changes colors on the tapestry to bright yellow and brown sand. He uses red thread to depict blood on the ground. The stitches now are placed in such a way as to create an illusion of something buried in the sand. The colors of the scene changes now. No longer are they bright, distinctive colors of the palace with its solid gold statues. Now the landscape is rather sparse, with little bits of green thread now and then, craftily forming bushes scattered here and there. The artist has cunningly teased white thread into fluffy balls that we recognize as a flock of sheep. Further over on the tapestry, we see orange and yellow threads intertwined with green thread, giving the illusion of a bush on fire. Our breath catches as the realistic image depicted here. The artist then goes on to use an odd brownish green thread to create frogs. He had the frogs come up out of a river, which he used black and reddish thread to create the bloody appearance of a once blue-green river. He again used a clever method of stitching black thread to look like swarms of lice and flies. We were captivated by his use of red and pink blends of thread to make boils and blisters on cows and horses and even people he had sewn so delicately with his masterpiece. Our breath caught at the shiny white balls of hail he created with threads of silver and gray. Brown and midnight black were the colors closer and closer, chosen for the formation of locusts in darkness. The most fascinating display of all on this particular tapestry is the strips of scarlet red on the doorpost of the crude-shaped buildings. Obviously, these were the houses of the slaves. It is no accounting of the amount of thread used to create the scene of thousands and thousands of people crossing the wide expanse of the desert pictured in this tapestry, and the water rising up and over their heads, a wild display of white foam and brilliant greens and blues and metallic grays, all woven together to create an exodus through the Red Sea. What began as bits and pieces of colored thread that made no sense has come together in a beautiful rendition of the life of a person named Moses. Moses was placed in a basket in the Nile River, which was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who raised him in the palace, where he grew up accustomed to authority, which he abused and killed an Egyptian, which caused him to flee into the desert, where he encountered God in a burning bush, who directed him back to Egypt, where he was to lead his people, the Hebrews, out of slavery, which was the purpose of him being pulled out of the Nile River. See how the artist wove all the events together for the good of Moses and the good of his people. Let's take a look at another tapestry. This one is incredibly beautiful. It hangs in the court of the garden of the king's palace. These colors are white, green, and blue, fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings and pillows of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. The drinking vessels were made of pure gold. Many colors were used in this tapestry. The artist's clever design made it seem possible to caress the smooth skin and perfect features of the young Jewish woman depicted here. We can almost smell the oil of myrrh and the perfume she used for purification. Purple thread is the color of her royal robes. There's a mixture of anger, resignation, and determination on her beautiful features of the woven scene. The artist uses a mixture of black and gray to depict a man in sackcloth and ashes. A spool of dark brown is used to create gallows that was 50 cubits high. The features of an evil man is depicted in dark hues of gray. Further over on the masterpiece, a banquet table is shown here, laden to the fullest with purple wines and yellow and white cheeses, green grapes, brown beads, and bread, succulent roasted meats, which were also intricately sewn and woven into the tapestry. We can almost pluck a grape from the table. There is a poignant scene with the beautiful young woman bowed before the king with a scepter of golden thread resting in her downcast hand. Finally, we get to the last scene. This is a dark scene of death, but not of the lively young woman. No, it's that of the dark man on his way to the 50 cubit gallows sewn with silken black threads. What started out as bits and pieces of colored thread that made no sense has come together in a beautiful design of life and courage of a beautiful Jewish girl named Hadassah, better known as Esther. The palace queen Vashti was dethroned, which was why Esther was brought before the king to serve as his concubine, which then turned out to be the queen, who was the niece of Mordecai, who refused to bow down to Haman, who plotted to kill the Jews, whom Esther ends up resolving by going before the king, which turned out to be her purpose in being placed at the palace in the first place. What started out as something evil in her life worked together for the good of her and her people. Esther's tapestry of life hangs in the palace still as the pages of the Bible and a tribute to the weaver's elegant sense of intrigue and timing. There is one more tapestry on our list, and we must see this artistry. This one began with threads and silver as a star is formed out of a background of darkness. Gold thread is used to design gifts of frankincense and myrrh. White silken threads are used to create the swaddling clothes wrapped around a baby in a roughly depicted manger of brown. Beautiful colors are used to represent the temple as the child grew to be around age 12. Colors of green and silver form rocks and hills and are used to bring alive the mountains he loved to prey on. Gray, blue, silver, and green thread is used to make the flowing water he walked on. Dark green and brown is used for the olives in the garden of Gethsemane that he prayed in on his last night of his life. Red was used as the color for the sweat that ran from his body as he prayed so hard that night. Purplish red and white and brown was used to depict the color of wine and bread that he ate with his disciples on that last night at that last meal. The water in a basin was sown with rust colors as he washed the dirt and grime off the disciples' feet in that last night in a beautiful upper room. Purple was the color for his robe on that fateful night. Grayish brown thread was used for the rugged cross he was hung on. Silvery brown was the color of the nails driven in his hands. Scarlet red was used once again for the blood that poured from his head, back, and side wounds. The tapestry looked so alive. We reach out to caress the wounds on his hands and feet. White is the color that was used to create the fine linen on his body, wrapped for his burial after his death. White was also the color used to dress the angel that heralded his resurrection. Again, what started out as bits and pieces of colored thread that made no sense has been woven into an unforgettable tapestry of the life of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. What seemed to be a horrible act of murder and mayhem comes together for good for the millions of people whose sins were covered by his blood, which was perfect and without sin, which was the reason he came into the world, which was lost and cut off from God, who dressed himself in flesh and walked among men, who took his life, which he gave as a sacrifice for the redemption of sins, which was his purpose for the men who later wrote, "All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose." All of these timeless tapestries live on and testify to that fact. What started out as bits and pieces of colored thread which made no sense, all come together with purpose in the end. All are designed by the same master, the same weaver in the tapestries of life. Thank you so much for listening, and tune in again when we have yet another short story from Generational Ministries.